Fantasy football is in full swing now, and we are talking all about that's impacting the weather with somebody whose sole job is to work in fantasy sports and what weather means to it. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci from the Lead Weather Team. Joined with me is Matt Hollander out in the Midwest and Sean Sublett over in Richmond, Virginia. I don't even know, guys. Do you guys play fantasy football? Daily fantasy football?
No, I'm too old.
No, come on, Sean.
No, here's the thing. I would, it's not that I don't want to do it, but I feel like if I wanted to do it well, I would have to spend more time on it than I want to spend on it. Does that follow?
I understand.
Because I figure if I did it just a little bit, I would be bad. And I don't have, I'm from old school. I'm like, just bet the line. That's it. Did they cover? Did they not? But nowadays, there's like all these second and third derivative things you can bet on. Hey, is such and such going to get 10 yards in the third quarter if it's raining? I mean, there's all that kind of stuff now. So that I'm kind of just, did they cover or did they not cover? Although I will do the over-under once in a while. I do like the over.
Over-under's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Sean, I'm totally with you with the fantasy sports. You know, I actually did it the most in high school. Again, when I had the most free time back in the old high school days, I did fantasy baseball, fantasy football. And then I laid off as I got into college. I laid off the fantasy baseball and I just did fantasy football. And I did it for a couple of years out of college. But then I just got busier and busier. And again, I enjoyed it, but it's one of those things I maybe enjoyed it too much. And I always got frustrated when I wasn't doing good. And I felt like I had to commit more time to it in order to do well. And as I started to do worse, because I couldn't spend as much time on it, it's like, I'm just not going to do it. I don't like losing.
I hear you, Matt. I used to do like SI's kids, I think, had some kind of fantasy.
Oh, wow. Really?
I remember doing Sports Illustrated. Yeah.
It was like an HTML web page. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I used to do 3 fantasy football leagues. Then went down to 2, and now I'm just in 1. I'm the commissioner of a fantasy football league that we've been doing for 12 years. So this is a serious one, and it's a 14 team. So if you're not at the fantasy football, 14 teams is on the bigger end for the number of players in there. But we have fun. And this year, actually, we just got a trophy for the first time for it. And it is a sweet-looking trophy. I don't have it, unfortunately. Else does. So anyway, enough about our fantasy football. We'll talk to you about your fantasy sports team or your daily fantasy sports with Kevin Roth from rotogrinders.com. He is a meteorologist who, like he says in the interview here, just fell into it one day and has loved it ever since. So without further ado, again, we're going to turn it over to Kevin. And we are really happy to welcome on our guest for today, Kevin Roth. He is an Emmy Award-winning broadcast meteorologist in Houston, Texas, and his love of weather and sports took him in a very unique direction. Kevin is a sports meteorologist for rotogrinders.com. That means fantasy sports and more. His sports-centric weather forecasts have been featured on Weather Channel, Fox Weather, CBS Sports, Forbes, and more, including this very podcast right here. Kevin and all of his sports weather analysis can be found on Twitter or X, whatever you're calling it nowadays, at Kevin Roth WX. Kevin, welcome to the show. And am I going to win my fantasy football season here? What do you think?
As long as you're paying attention to the weather. I like your chances. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to kind of chat about, how I've ended up in this weird niche that I've got.
Yeah, let's dive into it because, I think of myself, I use Yahoo Fantasy Sports and I see that little weather icon on there. And me as a meteorologist, I'm like, oh, it's like all these other, iPhone generic weather app stuff on there. But if you really are in the game of fantasy sports and sports betting, weather does play a role and you'll want to pay attention to it. So where did you go to school? How did you get interested in weather? And what brought you to RotoGrind?
Yeah, it was a weird journey to get here, but I've always wanted to be a TV meteorologist my whole life, even when I wasn't sure how, just as a kid, they're like, what do you want to be? I was like, I want to do that. And sure enough, I ended up going to school, got my master's degree at Mississippi State in meteorology, and started doing the normal TV grind, small markets in Mississippi up to Louisiana. And eventually I landed in Dallas, and I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do the TV gig forever. And then I randomly got an email from a friend who said, "Hey, I've got a random coworker who's looking to hire a meteorologist for something. I don't even know what it is, but you should reach out." And I was like, okay, well, why not? And I reached out, and they said they needed someone who loves weather and sports, but also is, down to just kick back and drink a beer. And I was like, well, that is me. That is entirely me. And that's how I got linked up with the Roto-Grinders team. Started part-time, and it's just been growing and building. And you mentioned those icons, when you look at Yahoo, it turns out people have a need for legitimate sports weather information, not just a, stupid little icon with rain that may or may not help anyone.
Yeah. So, tell us about Roto-Grinders, the website. Besides the weather, what can you find on there?
Yeah, so Roto-Grinders is primarily for folks who play daily fantasy sports, like on DraftKings and FanDuel. So these are often, more invested and more intense fantasy players. And Roto-Grinders gives people the plays, the information, the choices. It breaks down everything you could fathom. And I'm kind of the weather arm of that company. I'm just a separate, little part of that website that says, oh, by the way, while you're factoring out all these other things, keep in mind, winds are going to be 20 miles per hour in this game, and that could have, impacts X, Y, and Z.
Hey, Kevin, Sean over here. Now we're getting into football season, or we're in football season. I'm imagining this is the busiest time, but is that incorrect? Because I know baseball obviously has a big impact. You've got wind, you've got humidity, you've got heat. But in terms of how busy you're going to be, is this kind of prime time?
So I think I'd say that NFL, once you get into football, that's when I have the greatest audience, because fantasy football is massive compared to, say, fantasy baseball, which is, kind of a much smaller community. But I'm definitely busiest during baseball season because it's every single day. There's, 12 to 15 games, 7 days a week. And baseball games get legitimately rained out. That's something you don't see in football all the time. But in baseball, you play these guys in fantasy, and the game gets rained out, you get 0 points. So that is really when I am at my most important, is during those rainouts.
And then, Kevin, for football, what are the main things that you're looking at? What is your audience looking for as far as the weather information for football games?
I think the audience is getting smarter. It used to be people would say, oh, it's really cold in this spot. And the truth is the temperature doesn't really matter. Rain and snow has some impact on the game, but rain and snow and poor footing impacts the offense and the defense, in particular snow. Whereas the one element that only impacts the offense is the wind. That is the only time when those quarterbacks drop back and throw the ball. If those winds are sustained 15 to 20 miles per hour or higher, you see significant downgrades in passing yards, in total scoring. Those are the games that we really try to target. And those are also the games that are easier to forecast for days out. So that helps with sports betting a bit as well. Whereas with rain, do you really know if it's going to rain specifically at one point, at one time, 4 days out? Probably not. But with wind, you can have a pretty good idea in advance.
Tell us what your day is like for football season here. And are there other sports, in the fall that you're looking at, being after most of the fantasy baseball season? Is it really just football in October and November? So tell us what a week looks like for you now.
Now that we're kind of closing out baseball season, still the first thing is wake up, look at the forecasts for football. I daily keep things updated because as far as sports betting goes, people want to know this information as it comes out. It started off with my job, I could just give one update a week before the game and everyone was like, oh, this is great. But as you start giving out that content, people, of course, want more and more of that content. So I keep the forecasts up essentially all week long. Twitter hits, I do PR hits, like kind of what I'm doing now in a sense. Weather and sports is super interesting. People want to talk about it. So part of my job is not just giving the weather, but it's also using weather as an in for PR to help my company. So that's why I'm on the Weather Channel and Fox Weather and these various podcasts, letting people know that there is a spot where you can find good sports weather information. And then hopefully having people come over to Roto-Grinders and take a look at that and seeing what else the site offers.
So is there kind of a slower time once we get out of baseball and football, which I think are the two busy outdoor seasons? do you go into a slower time there in late winter, early spring? You know, football's done, baseball hasn't started spring training yet. Is that a time to kind of regroup, or are there other little things going on out there?
Well, there's always golf. Yeah, in general, I'd say that is a slower time, but that's when people start asking about, you know, how's the soccer game look? How's the golf? How's the NASCAR? You know, there's always some outdoor sporting event to forecast for. And a lot of these sports, golf in particular, has a massive weather impact on those winds in particular. So there's always content to be had. But during those slower times, that's when I can set up a lot of the PR work that I do as well.
And Kevin, just to clarify, are you the only meteorologist at Roto Grinders, or are y'all? And if you are y'all looking to expand anytime soon? And you know of any other meteorologists out there that are focused on fantasy sports like you? Maybe not at Roto Grinders, but at other places.
So I'm the only one that does it for Roto Grinders, and it is, you know, 7 days a week. It's got its perks because I'm working from home, but it also is, especially during baseball season, it's a grind 7 days a week, and it's pretty high stakes with rainouts. I don't know of anyone else who is currently doing it. I've seen some other folks kind of dabbling in sports weather, but to my knowledge, I think I'm the only one who consistently is cranking that out and who is paid to do that job. And I'm happy with that. That works for me.
But Kevin, you know, as someone in New Jersey, you know, we were the first to legalize sports betting. Back in, what was it now? I can't remember, 5 or 6 years ago. So we're very used to it here in New Jersey with the sports betting. But I want to explain to people how your job, or does it differ between actual sports betting on the event and daily fantasy sports? Are there different things people are looking for when it comes to football season in that?
It's a great question. I think the biggest difference is that for daily fantasy sports, you're essentially making these lineups, and these players' salaries are set each and every week at the start. So you pay $8,000 for this good player. Whereas sports betting, the lines are always evolving. So they'll say, okay, we're expecting 50 points total in this football game. But if the forecast starts showing high winds, then that total will begin to drop. And by the time you get to Thursday, it's 48 points. And by Friday, it's 46 points. And as that total drops, you're losing your opportunity to get your money in at a good time, at a smart line. So for sports betting, you need to be able to get the information earlier and still be certain that is going to happen. You don't want to make a bet where the weather never comes through for you, but you need that content earlier for sports betting. Whereas for fantasy sports, so long as you know it by Sunday morning, that's fine.
On that note, I've got some friends who do a lot of commodity forecasting, you know, whether it's agriculture, agribusiness, energy trading, and they will tell me, it's like, you know what, Sean, as soon as the new GFS drops, I see the markets move this way, I see the markets move that way. Is there anything similar to that in sports betting? Like, oh, the new GFS has come in, it's windier, the line has dropped, just like you alluded to, or is that still not quite, are we still not quite there yet?
Yeah, I don't think that most people are that in tune or that advanced with the forecast yet. I would say if anything moves, it might be like when I put my article out, like when I put my forecast out. I think the average fan is kind of just looking at those icons like we talked about. They're not that invested in it. And gradually people are learning, A, that it does matter, and B, they're learning what matters as well. They're learning that it's the wind and not so much the rain. They're learning the things that really do matter.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot so far, Kevin. This is all good stuff. I'm learning a lot. You can check him out again on Roto Grinders. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll come back on the other side. You're listening Across the Sky Podcast. And welcome back, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast with the Lee Weather team. You can find new episodes of the Across the Sky podcast every Monday on your favorite news website or wherever you get your podcasts. And we are talking with none other than Kevin Roth from Roto Grinders, meteorologist for Roto Grinders. Yes, a sports betting and fantasy site does have a meteorologist, and Kevin's been explaining all the reasons why to us here. So, you know, Kevin, when you're, you know, looks like you're doing a lot of videos here, you know, people, they can't see it now, but you're in front of a green screen at your house. Tell me what it's like making these videos. Are people giving you requests for videos? Are you determining what's going out? How does that work?
I'm kind of my own boss in the weather department. So I find high impact events, whether it's this weekend in football. I guess this podcast is airing a little later, but whether it's a weekend in football or a golf event or whatever it is, if it's a high enough impact event and there's a weather forecast you can get out, people want the information, they'll share the information, and it just kind of grows organically that way.
With the green screen, everything, it's kind of amazing, right? Like how low the cost of technology is to produce videos now. I mean, you don't need the full TV studio. They're great, obviously, right? We all have experience in it. They're wonderful. But what's your setup like at home? And how much did it cost you?
Oh, it was nothing. I mean, I've got a pop-up green screen that, is maybe $100. I got a webcam and a microphone, and that's all I really need to get things done. And we do have, I got to give a shout out to Rotogrinders. We have a great production team that can help. They put together a lot of the videos. So I just basically go in front of my green screen. I talk about the forecast, and then they make it look really pretty. So shout out to the behind the scenes crew.
Yeah, shout out to Rotogrind.
Yeah, and as far as graphics go, are you using any kind of a weather graphics package, or is it the folks at Rotogrinders kind of helping create the graphics for you?
Yeah, they're creating the graphics for me, and that might be the next step for me, is to be able to create all of my own content. I'm not quite there yet in as far as needing to do that, because I'm happy with the setup with Rotogrinders. But that'd be the next setup, is if I could somehow get a Max box or something and have legitimate, up-to-date, weather graphics. It'd be fantastic. I'd love that.
You have any interesting stories about one particular event or a couple of particular events that went really well? And conversely, if you want to talk about it, maybe not so well?
I mostly have ones that have gone bad, to be honest with you. The forecast that you hit, you're expected to hit them. So those don't stand out. It's the ones that go wrong that stand out, because I've got 60,000 people on Twitter barking at me when it goes wrong. So those are the ones that I remember. There's been rainouts, I'm thinking in baseball in particular. The Washington Nationals, famous for weather shenanigans. They have postponed a game for rain when they did not get a single drop of rain. So I had the game, it was all green. It was all good. Nothing could go wrong. They postponed the game. It never rained. And, people don't understand why it was postponed. They just know that you were wrong and the game got postponed. So, I hear about that. There was a postponement a few years ago in San Diego for rain that, it drizzled. It barely drizzled. I don't even know how they postponed it, but they're just not used to drizzle there. So there's been some ones that stand out on the negative end, just because I clearly remember those moments.
Yeah, I got to imagine, too, you're probably doing some of these international games, too, right? And how did that work out for you?
That can be a bit of a struggle, because my usual tools, like the HRRR model and a lot of these things that I generally use for North American forecasting, well, that doesn't apply. So that can be a bit of a struggle. The weather patterns are very different. Golf is a big one, where they're always in the UK or Scotland, they're always somewhere wild, it seems like. Those can be a struggle, plus the timing of those is at odd times when I might have to stay awake later than I want to, or wake up earlier than I want to get the latest data.
And then, Kevin, for Major League Baseball and NFL, we're going to go with both. Most challenging place to forecast for? Is there one that stands out to you, a place that gives you more trouble more often than not in the NFL and MLB?
Yeah, in MLB, it is most definitely in Washington. And it's not so much the weather pattern, it's the organization. Some organizations, like the Twins, they've got meteorologists on staff, and they are so well prepared, and they communicate the expectations and what they plan to do about rain that's coming. And other organizations, like the Washington Nationals, they give you nothing. They give you nothing, and they just will postpone at the drop of a hat, or maybe they'll wait out the rain for 5 hours, and you just have no idea. And that's the challenging part of my job sometimes, is not just nailing the weather, but trying to figure out the organization's response to the weather. That is every bit as important for fantasy players, but it's a whole lot harder to figure out. And then as far as football goes, you've got some good ones, man. Buffalo might be Buffalo in the wintertime. You get those snow bands where it might be feet of snow, or if they're just on the other edge, it might be an inch. It is just a sharp delineation, and forecasting for Buffalo is always fun and kind of terrifying.
So I want to go back to the stadiums here. Like, is that just experience over time, like what the threshold is for postponing, or do you actually meet with the teams? How does that work?
It's just learned experience over time. And I think that is one thing. I've been doing this for 10 years that I've really started to learn to get an understanding of how certain organizations work, which organizations communicate better, which organizations are more patient. Like the Colorado Rockies, they'll wait out anything. They're a fantastic organization, or even if I see storms in the forecast, I know unless it floods in that ballpark, they're going to get that game in. And that just comes with doing this year in and year out. There's also incredible microclimates in these various ballparks. Whereas in Wrigley, if the winds are blowing out in Wrigley, this is a massive, massive advantage to hitters. Whereas there are other ballparks, like in San Francisco, they built that park to minimize wind impacts. So the same wind blowing out at 10 to 15 miles per hour does almost nothing in one ballpark, where in the other one, it has a massive impact. And you just got to learn those differences.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, with regard not just to baseball, but football. I mean, we don't have football stadiums nowadays that are open on one end anymore. Those are pretty much a bygone era. But I always think about the swirling nature of wind and a high wind impact. And in your experience doing this for 10 years, and there's a high wind event, and I say high wind, 15, 20, not dangerous.
Right.
But is there a consistency to like, okay, I know the wind is going to be from this direction and it's going to be about this speed. So this consistently does X or Y in this stadium or that stadium with regard to football? Because for my mind, I'm like, well, if it's a stadium encircled and is the wind going to dip down? I always have trouble with that, to those microclimates. What have you learned with respect to that over the years?
That's a great question. And it matters, what stadium you're talking about. I can think of some on the negative end, like in Cleveland. When those winds come in, it swirls. It has a huge impact in Cleveland in particular. And there are some places where I've learned it matters a lot. And I also have a tool where it's called Weather Edge. And essentially, we've pulled all the data from every single game in each stadium, all of the weather data. And we've seen, okay, if the winds are 15 to 20 miles per hour from this direction, this is how it's impact passing yards, scoring. And so it can help me digest what the impact is because I've got the statistics on all of it.
Moneyball.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to know, right? So it's Sunday, right? It's NFL Sunday. Are you like Scott Hansen and just sitting in one place all day long, not going to the bathroom, waiting for all the games to finish? What is it like for you on Sunday?
It's very busy leading up to kickoff, like trying to get the forecasts out and doing all the PR hits and getting the tweets out. I generally just get to enjoy the games. But if there is weather games, if there's rain games or wind games, I want to watch them. I want to see how that 20 mile per hour wind impacted this game. I want to see how the team adjusted their game plan because of the rain. So I try to make a conscious effort to watch any impact weather games, but I still do it, as a fan just as much as I'm doing it, as a professional.
I'm going to follow up too, because we didn't actually ask this question. Are you doing college football as well?
Yeah.
Because that seems like a lot more places in a lot different areas.
The face.
There's so many games. So many games.
Are you doing all of them?
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm trying. Yes, I'm trying. It's much harder to keep up consistently with the forecast. I'm not admittedly a massive college football fan. So first, I'm like, all right, this school, I don't know where it is. So I got to Google, all right, where's this school? And like, do they have a dome? And I got to Google, do they have a dome? And it's a process. And it's one of those things. This is new to me. The college football I've only done for a couple of years. And as I learn, just like I've learned through MLB and NFL, I'll get better at it. But right now it's kind of the bane of my existence. It's college football.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of like Wyoming, like they're 7,200 feet high. That place is crazy stuff,
Yeah, and always windy.
Yeah.
It's fun because you can get some really wild games, but also if I have a weakness, it's my lack of knowledge in that sport. It's going to be windy here, so take the under. Well, turns out these two teams just run the Wildcat and they don't pass anyway, so then the winds don't matter. I don't know those nuances in college like I do the other sports.
And then, Kevin, I'm curious about how much the wind direction does matter, because you're talking about the orientation of these stadiums. Like, I would think that the wind speed itself is probably the biggest factor about how strong the winds are, regardless of direction. But how big a role do you think wind direction does play into football games and baseball games?
You're right. It's wind strength first and foremost, and then it's orientation. But in baseball, the two are tied in, right? We don't care how strong the winds are in baseball. We care, are the winds blowing out and are they going to carry home run balls, or are they blowing in and they're going to suppress home runs? So in baseball, those two things are tied in and equally important. Whereas in football, as a general rule, it's a crosswind that is most impactful, because if you get these winds parallel with the field, then sure, one team is at a disadvantage and they're throwing into the wind, but the other team has the wind at their back and they can move the ball pretty efficiently. And then, of course, that switches through the game. But if you get a crosswind, that's both teams. You get a 20-plus mile per hour crosswind, any throw over 20 yards that's not on a line, that's going to get blown off course, and it leads to more incompletions and more turnovers.
And then going off of college football, because I think I opened the can of worms that I didn't mean to, but I'm thinking about, like, I can't remember what it's called, but like they have that college basketball game every year. It's on an aircraft carrier outside. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know the basketball game. Yes, it's amazing.
Like, does that, what do you do for that? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. That's the other problem with college football, is that there are all these games where you think it's the home team's game, but it turns out they're playing at a neutral site. I'm just basically trying to keep my head above water and give people some semblance of what to expect in college football. And I would say my expertise certainly lies in baseball, NFL, and PGA.
Gotcha. So college basketball and the aircraft carrier, not really the forte.
There are some fun niche forecasts, like the Winter Classic in the NHL is an outdoor event, and if it's really cold, can the goalkeeper sit there in the freezing cold where everybody else is skating around and warming up, but the goalie's just there freezing? Like, is that going to impact him?
That's a good point.
That's
Nathan's
really
cool.
Nathan's hot dog contests.
Oh my gosh.
Is it going to be 90 degrees when these guys are choking down hot dogs? Give me the under. They're not eating 72 hot dogs if it's 94.
I'm going to follow up on that. So what do you think of this year's hot dog eating contest with the rain delay?
It was
the first ever.
It was amazing. That was my Christmas. We had my Twitter was blowing up. People were like, what do we do? Roth, are they going to come back? I really enjoyed that. And I do love kind of those niche events. In baseball, they've got the Field of Dreams game where they go out into Iowa. Iowa. And they've got the corn arounds. And I was telling everyone about corn sweat, how that corn leads to really high dew point, high humidity. And a high dew point is good for the ball carrying. And so I was like, all right, take the overs here. We got the corn sweat overs. And they must have hit like 18 home runs in that game. And so the corn sweat overs were a fantastic bet.
And Kevin, I'm thinking about some of the other podcasts that we've done talking about weather in sports, and some of the other sports that have come up have been horse racing and NASCAR. Do you do anything with those?
A little bit. Again, I'd say I more so dabble in that. There is a big demand for it, but I'm not too familiar with horse racing and I'm not too familiar with NASCAR. So if people ask me, I'll forecast for it, but I don't truly know what impact that has and how we can bet on those things. And that's the thing about sports weather, is that if you don't fully understand both sides of it, both the weather and the sport itself, then you're not going to be able to give and communicate really good advice. So those sports just aren't my niche, at least not yet.
I think that's all we got. Unless, Sean, do you have a final question?
No, I am good. This has been fabulous.
Yeah, I could hang out with you guys. Like, we could do this for another 30 minutes. This is a blast.
I mean, we might have it. Maybe we'll have you before the hot dog eating contest.
A part two.
Yeah,
Bring it
part
back.
two.
I love
totally.
it.
No, this is great. I'm trying to think if there's anything we haven't touched on.
Kevin,
is there anything you want to add?
Well, Kevin, I'll throw this out. I mean, I think there are going to be some people listening to this. One thing we like about this podcast is exposing people to other jobs that meteorologists have besides the guys on TV, because that's what they're most familiar for, is our media folks. And so there are probably people listening to this like, man, weather and sports, that's two things I love. So if you have any advice for people, I mean, I guess that could be creating competition for you, but people who want to get into where you are and want to, look at this world of weather and sports, do you have any advice for people who are looking to come into this world, and because I think it's only going to be growing. It sounds like you could use some help pretty soon.
Yeah.
So advice for folks who want to get into this world of weather and sports.
Yeah, whether it's, weather and sports or just weather and fill in the blank with your passion, whatever it is, there's probably a market for it. And if it's weather and sports and you just put out good free content and create a name for yourself, like that's what it's all about. And I'm fortunate to have kind of first mover's advantage. I was the first person doing it, and that certainly helped. But if you just get your name out there, anyone is starved for content these days, right? Any and all media sources are looking for content. So if you're willing to do free work to build your brand and build your name, that will eventually lead to paid work. I feel confident in saying that.
I agree. Good life advice here as we wrap
and
up.
It's fun, guys. Sports, it's so fun. Every day I wake up and I'm like, what's the exciting sports weather thing going to be today? It's a great job.
Yeah. No, totally. And since I reached out to you, I've been following you on Twitter, and just some of what you're putting out is just so it's relevant. It's just kind of funny. It's like fantasy sports and sports betting weather. It's great. I love it. So I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us about this and a different way to look at weather forecasting. But you can go to rotogrinders.com. That's where you can find Kevin, or his Twitter or X page, whatever you're calling it. That's at Kevin Roth WX. Kevin, we love to have you on, and I think we're going to bring you on for a part 2 at some point in the future. So thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
I love it. Guys, thank you so much for having me. And if anybody's out there and you're thinking, all right, I'm a fantasy sports, what do I do with this weather? If it's winds over 20 miles per hour, don't play the receivers, don't play the quarterbacks. Everything else, you're probably in pretty good shape.
Good piece of advice. Thanks a lot, Kevin. We appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Hope you guys all loved that interview with Kevin. And, Kevin brought up a good point at the end with the Winter Classic and the goalies getting cold. I never thought of that. And as somebody who plays hockey, that actually makes a good point. If you're standing around all day and it's 10 or 12 degrees, you might not be at your sharpest. But what did you think, Matt? What did you think of the pod?
Well, again, we've said this on every episode we've done about how weather impacts sports. And you can really dive into some tiny details. Like he mentioned the game in Iowa, the corn sweat and the added humidity and how that impacts home runs. And then also his discussion about wind direction and wind speed, how wind speed is really the biggest impact when you look at baseball and football. And it was interesting, wind speed a little bit more so than wind direction, especially for football. And I never thought about that it's more of the crosswinds rather than being parallel with the football field, because those crosswinds impact both teams instead of one team occasionally having an advantage for half of the game and then a disadvantage the other half of the game. So it's actually more impactful crosswinds. But then I had to think, like, he must have some crazy number of bookmarks, because you have to look at every stadium if you want to figure out which wind direction is going to be the most significant. Is it going to be a parallel wind, or is it going to be across the field? And so you have to think about the orientation of each stadium. So I imagine he has this crazy number of bookmarks somewhere with all these different stadiums to see their orientation. So you can, it sounds like he needs some help. And I feel like that. I think they need to expand their weather team. I think they need to hire some additional meteorologists. I bet there's some folks listening to this podcast that be like, hey, I'll sign up for that.
Yeah.
I suspect you're right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a cool website. His Twitter page is good because he does get into the nitty gritty of some of these games when there's like rain out at ballparks, and especially as we get into football, we continue to get into football season and snow starts coming. Everyone loves that first snow game of the year, which is usually somewhere at a college football stadium in the Rockies in like late October, early November, and then it starts spreading as we go on. But that's what we have for this episode of the Across the Sky podcast. You can always send us your questions via email at podcast@lee.net. We also have a phone number as well. Leave a voicemail. We have actually gotten a couple of voicemails. We haven't shared any on the pod, but if you did want to do that, you certainly could. Our phone number for that is 609-272-7099. Again, 609-272-7099. As we say every episode, we got more episodes for you on what's happening. We have them lined up for you. And as we go into the month of October, we are going to be talking about what we can learn from the Earth's past with Mike Mann, Dr. Mike Mann. He's most, I would say, famously known for the hockey stick diagram of greenhouse gas emissions and rising temperatures on the Earth. So that is coming up we'll have more for you as well as we go deeper into fall. So for Sean Sublett and Matt Holliner and Kirsten Lang, who couldn't be with us, I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci, and thanks again for listening to the Across the Sky podcast.